All right, welcome to the moment that I've been waiting for, our Authoritarian Leaders Unit. In this unit, we are going to cover Hitler, Stalin, Mao, and Castro. Now, you got to be able to compare and contrast how these leaders rose to power, how they affected women and minority groups, and be able to argue whether their rise to power was ultimately legal. As we go through this month-long unit, look for patterns. If you watch global news, there are authoritarians today that rose to power in Asia, Africa, South America, using these exact same formulas. You're going to recognize it, so start looking. In general, we need to answer these questions, and we're going to get a lot deeper and deeper as we go. You know how I love my tables. Now, you don't have to take notes like this, but I do want you to be mindful as you're going through this material in the next few weeks that I'm going to develop a paper too using questions around these kinds of subtopics. You're going to be reading the Weimar Constitution directly. However, here's the meat and potatoes of how it ultimately worked. The Treaty of Versailles assigned all blame for World War I to Germany. Therefore, a new government was constructed by the Big Three, which would reshape and hopefully disallow for another war to happen. Now remember, Germany couldn't have any military in the Rhineland, which separated it from France and Belgium. It had to focus on repaying the billions of dollars in reparations. So in the meantime, the Weimar Constitution was ruled by a president that would be elected by the German people 20 years and older every 7 years. This president, much like the United States, was the commander-in-chief of the army who controlled all armed forces. However, due to the Treaty of Versailles, the size of the military was supposed to be strictly limited and in theory shouldn't have been much of a problem. The president then selected a chancellor who was then the leader of the Reichstag. The Reichstag was the lawmaking body, so think of it like Congress, which was a bicameral split between a lower house and an upper house. It's a bit of a play on American democracy and a parliamentary monarch. The Reichstag would then make laws which German citizens would then vote for. So there's a few flaws with this. First, Article 48 said that in the event of an emergency, the president could bypass the Reichstag and the German voters altogether in order to make laws. However, the event of an emergency is not explicitly defined and it's left openly for interpretation. Many historians, Orthodox and revisionists, actually agree that Article 48 was an intentional loophole to allow a more authoritarian type leadership to rise to power. Piers Brennan's argument here is valuable because he cites Hindenburg and Ludendorff's maintenance of power following World War I. All right, so straight from the mouth of Article 48. If a state fails to perform the duties imposed upon it by the federal constitution or by federal law, the president may enforce performance with an aid of the armed forces. Let that sink for a second. If public order and security are seriously disturbed or endangered within the Federation, the president may take all necessary steps for their restoration, intervening, if need be, with the armed forces. For the said purpose, he may suspend for the time being, either wholly or in part, the fundamental rights described in those listed articles. Okay, so finally, the Reichstag itself is a problem. They use something called popular representation in order to fill seats. Therefore, when electing representatives, they broke the vote into overall party percentages. You weren't voting for a person, but for control of party seats. So applying this to the United States, today it might look something like this. If 1/3 of the population voted Republican, 1/3 voted Democrat, and 1/3 voted Green Party mixed with Libertarian and Independent, then our House and Senate would be filled not with specific people that we voted for, but to match the overall agreed upon party representation. Each election, this could flip based on policies that are created. So if you're mad about the economy, change your vote. Now, instead of a 1/3 Republican or Democrat, it could be 2/3, or even more complicated, new parties could start popping up in the form of interest groups. So now, instead of having 2 or 3 parties overall, you could have 50. This gives the leadership an easier time to create to create change quickly when you don't need a majority representation. Now, a majority vote could be comprised of only 15% of the overall Reichstag, as the other 50 parties only make up 5% each or less. Here's where the Nazi Party make their grand and yet horrifically legal entrance. Let's go back a little bit. Remember the Franco-Prussian War of 1871? It unified the states of Prussia under one German flag. However, those states still exist. Think of the United States, we have 50 states under one federal government. Same here. The German Revolution, aka November Revolution, aka October Revolution, same thing, is the civic conflict at the end of World War I that officially created the Weimar Republic, removing Wilhelm II from power and leaving a true power vacuum. When we're creating our formula for absolutist takeovers, take note, it always, always, always starts with a power vacuum. All right, a few little interesting facts to note about Wilhelm. He was born breech, feet first, which resulted in Erb's palsy, which made his left arm 6 inches shorter than his right arm. Just thought that was fascinating. Hitler's takeover of Germany is studied in 5 different stages initially. Stage 1 is immediately following the October-November German Revolution in 1918. But Ludendorff and Hindenburg don't really believe in democracy, and they were just saving face in order to get less punishment for themselves, so they agreed to the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, and therefore the Weimar Constitution was accepted. They were able to maintain power, and therefore were motivated into cooperation. Remember, these are military generals that fought on behalf of World War I in Germany. Hindenburg and Ludendorff. I feel like I should take posture notes from them. All right, due to the geographic cuts caused by the Treaty of Versailles itself, Germany lost over 1/3 of their economic potential. Combine this with the forced reparations, and their new republic's economy was just ruined from the start. It was gutted. So in 1919, a communist group called the Spartacists tried to stage an uprising in Germany in order to mimic that of the Russian Revolution. Hitler supported the socialist takeover initially, but he changed his mind, realizing that communism didn't really allow for monetary incentives for cooperation with rich people. So this later becomes a scapegoat for the anti-Semitic propaganda under the Nazi regime, as it is the Jewish people in Germany that are now blamed for inciting communist rhetoric. Obviously, this is completely asinine. The Weimar Constitution, among its many failures, including its general structure, also included provisions that specified citizen liberties. People were guaranteed that the freedom of speech, religion, etc., unless the Reichstag didn't want you to have those things anymore. Therefore, the liberty laws are a series of laws that are created which use this loophole in the Constitution that eventually can say individual liberties can be restricted if those individuals are given a day's warning before their arrest or detention. 1 day's warning, and we can take away your civil liberties. Let that sink in. Stage 1 of Hitler's rise, as you may have noticed, has nothing to do, literally, with Hitler, and everything to do with the Weimar Constitution and the endless loopholes that it creates. Stage 2, on the other hand, starts to examine the political manipulation of this new government. Friedrich Ebert is the first president of the Weimar Republic, ruling from 1919 until his death in 1925. Now remember the structure of the Weimar. The president is the commander-in-chief. But Ebert signs a special agreement to not cooperate with the new rules of the Republic, as he's got Hindenburg and Ludendorff in his back pocket. So keep in mind that all of Germany is upset about Diktat, or the terms of the forced peace settlement. And not only do the elected officials not want to cooperate, but neither do the citizens. They're paying these reparations with 1/3 less economic production in order to make it happen. People are bitter, and they're looking for an outlet. The agreement legally allows the Weimar military to act in its own interests and not in the interests of the state. Therefore, they are free to act on their own accord. Think about that. What if the United States military could just go rogue and just start doing whatever it wanted? Following World War I, multiple parties rise into prominence throughout Germany. Remember the idea about proportional representation? If 10% of the Unicorn Party get the vote, then the Reichstag will be 10% unicorns. SPD is not to be confused with SBD, or the Social Democrats, which is Ebert's party, and the NSDAP become the Nazis ruling under the banner of removing all agreements of the Treaty of Versailles, regaining lost German territories, and restricting German citizen to purify German potential. Now, while Ebert is busy making insane plans to let the Weimar military wreak havoc and have no allegiance to the state, Hitler is still an unknown. The NSDAP party at this point is considered a bit of a joke and has very limited proportional representation in the Reichstag. However, in 1923, Germany is struck by an economic crisis that begins with the French and Belgian occupation of the Ruhr Valley. Because Germany isn't paying the war debts quickly enough, according to France and Belgium, they occupy the industrial center of Germany, the Ruhr Valley. In order to get them out of Germany, Ebert orders the immediate rapid printing of cash. However, because that money is printed and has no real economic value, it's worthless. It's a kite, not worthless. This leads to the hyperinflation, and the U.S. steps in to loan Germany the necessary money in the Dawes Plan. This should feel like a review. Remember, the money laundering idea, the U.S. gives money to Germany, they give the money to the U.K. and France and Belgium, and then U.K., France, and Belgium pay back their debts to the United States. It sort of works. France leaves and war is avoided for a while. That kite is adorable. I want to make a money kite. I wonder if that'd be illegal. During the crisis, however, both the Nazi Party and the Communist parties were able to create real questions about the legitimacy of the Weimar government. And Hitler stages a push. Think of a push like a coup, called the beer hall push. I love that word. He spent months speaking in beer halls, telling anyone who would listen that Germany is better than this, and European nations just want to push Germany down. It's all for German glory. The German citizens are to blame for the diktat, and it is the right and responsibility for Germany to take this moment back into the sun. At first, people thought Hitler was kind of crazy, but he really was a powerful speaker, and that appealed to people's frustration, their anger, their starvation, and more than anything, their loss. Slowly his following increased, and with the help of General Ludendorff, remember, he doesn't have to be a man of the country anymore, they stage a coup to overthrow Ebert. It is unsuccessful, and Hitler and Ludendorff are arrested for conspiring against Ebert and the Weimar Republic. But during his trial, Hitler makes a speech 100% admitting his full guilt in his crimes. However, he argues while he is guilty for trying to overthrow Ebert, he did it due to his loyalty to the German people, and that Ebert is actually the real criminal. This relative unknown suddenly gets the spotlight. He is sentenced to 5 years in prison, but he only goes in for 9 months. The prison cell is swanky and it's huge. It's more like a basement apartment, and Hitler gets visitors, he gets great food, he's treated extremely well. And in this prison, he writes Mein Kampf. The judicial leniency shows the judicial doubt of democracy itself, and therefore the favoring of Hitler and a totalitarian state. Ludendorff, as a side note, is let go. He's free. Now, the main ideas about Mein Kampf are simply politics is made from intense conflict. There should be no compromise. Germany's destiny is to destroy the Jewish population and seize the Slavic lands. General hatred of communism. They hate the redistribution of wealth and enjoy money. Power of the state stems from central social organization, and women are subordinate to men. They don't get to participate openly in politics. Now later, the push becomes known as the Martyrs' Day to celebrate those shot in the uprising. Obviously, this is later after Hitler rises to full power. However, In the meantime, it's the Dawes Plan that actually works temporarily, yielding us the new stage of the golden era where people are no longer starving to death and the appeal, that feels like a gross word, of authoritarian regimes lose power until the stock market crash of 1921 brings a new push for socialism or even communism, and that feared redistribution of wealth drives Hitler's reign again. Okay, so again, the NSDAP, or the Nazi Party, at this point has a very small following, especially with the emergence of the Golden Era. However, following prison, Hitler's gained a little bit of fame, and he uses this time in order to develop the 25-point program. Hitler then becomes the face of the Nazi Party. The 25 points in general say that Germany must be united with Austria, Anschluss, which is actively not allowed in the Treaty of Saint-Germain. Germany needs room to breathe, Lebensraum, and therefore needs land and space to grow, Europe. The Treaty of Versailles is diktat and must be repealed immediately, and only a member of the race can be a citizen. Jewish people are to blame for everything. I'm obviously abbreviating. Foreigners are bad. Everyone deserves to work, and everyone should work so that you can be a productive German citizen. All criminals should be killed outright. They should not stand trial. All industry should be nationalized for the glory of Germany, and women and children should be protected with no child labor allowed. Now remember, people are starving and in the streets in 1923. And education here should also be formatted to focus, excuse me, on the glory of Germany. Okay, there should have been some red flags in here, but when you're starving to death, I don't know. Enter the Golden Age. Had the Dawes Plan not been this recycling of money, it would have worked. Hitler would not have been a name that we sadly know, and the Nazi Party would have faded away into the crazy hovel that they arose from. However, Hitler knew that this was just a bump in the road that was going to collapse. He was just waiting to buy his time. So he goes into the countryside. Think Sound of Music. Yeah, literally. He's like hanging out, literally, where this movie was filmed. Hitler goes, takes his time to rebuild his party away from the distraction of industry, work, and, I don't know, country. Now, two brothers named Strasser, they want to go the socialist route because they think they're going to have more luck with a revolution in the making. And they need to follow the successful model of the USSR. However, Hitler knows better here, and he sees that there are a lot of rich people in Germany who would be willing to fund just about anything as long as they get to keep their wealth. Meanwhile, Ebert dies in 1925, and there's a rapid succession of presidents and especially chancellors, and agreements on the Western European countries that advocate for love, not war. In 1929, the money laundering and reparations catches up to the world. General Hindenburg is now president, and the industrial era that began pre-World War I, tying the entire globe into one singular economy, collapses. When the stock market crashes in 1929, it affects the entire globe, causing a global economic depression. In times of depression, countries begin hoarding resources due to the fear of limited resources on Earth and general competition, which only drives the economy further into despair. Thus, the end of the Golden Era. 1/3 of all German workers were unemployed by 1933. As people suffer, they naturally turn to extremism, and they blame their new Republican form of government, in this case, for being unable to cope with the economic collapse, thereby agreeing with Hitler's statements during his beer hall putsch trial. Because of proportional representation, there are too many political parties, and there's no real majority. Now think back to your AP government documents, Fed 10, Madison, Tyranny of the Masses. Factions can drown each other out by having so many, not one voice can be heard above the crowd. So therefore, no laws can be effectively made, and Hindenburg is relied upon for putting them into action using emergency decrees and bypassing the Reichstag altogether. Hindenburg appoints Brüning as the chancellor, who essentially tells the German population it isn't his fault that they're starving. Sucks to be you. Let me eat my schnitzel in peace. Socialism grows in following, and more people grow hungry. In 1932, Hindenburg realizes that Hitler is a true problem. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So he asks Hitler to be vice chancellor. But Hitler declines, as he doesn't want to be vice anything. He wants to be the government. And in 1933, the Socialist Party is gaining so much representation in the Reichstag that rich people are fearing losing their wealth. And Hindenburg appoints Hitler as chancellor. But of course, the chancellor is still under the president, and Hitler doesn't want to be vice anything. So he wants to be the government. In 1933, there's an election for president, and Hindenburg wins against Hitler. Almost immediately after Hitler's last, I think it's like 7 days, the parliamentary building of the Reichstag is burned to the ground. On the 27th of February, 1933, and it is a communist supporter, van der Lubbe, but Nazis were equally blamed for the incident. Hitler calls for a revote for president, and meanwhile, he's able to convince Hindenburg, his competition and political rival, to use Article 48 and suspend all basic rights of citizens. This is a time of attack, an imminent danger to Germany. Save us from ourselves. And Hindenburg uses Article 48 to end the riotous chaos. The Enabling Act is created, which combines the president with the chancellor later. Goodbye legitimate government. Keep in mind, Hitler did none of this directly. Because of the popular representation model, 2/3 of the population vote to overthrow the Weimar Constitution legitimacy. And while Hitler's brown shirts, remember Mussolini's black shirts, are outlawed, communism is also outlawed, and rich Germans throw their entire backing behind the Nazi party. Meanwhile, the Nazis take to the streets and start attacking all members of communist and socialist parties. Hitler uses this chaos of brown shirts that he created to create an even tighter measure on the German people. Again, think like Mussolini. Incredibles. Stages 1 through 5 are about Hitler's rise to power. Now, it's time to start consolidating it. Hitler passes the Enabling Act using Article 48, which allows Hitler to rule without the Reichstag for 4 years. Anyone who disagreed with the Nazi Party were equally disposed of, including all civil service officials who questioned Hitler's regime. This establishes the official Führer state. They gained legitimacy by attacking the opposition outright. Throughout using the fear of socialism and communism and the dreaded redistribution of wealth, the Nazis are able to control the government like a total war state. Hitler creates a cabinet of advisors, a pro-Nazi press and propaganda machine, outlaws and questions defacing any competing press outlets, creates a labor and agricultural department that are focused on this expansion of the German state, factories to supply services for uniforms, banners, and even insurance funds for families of those killed by communists and some from World War I. He establishes a legal branch for lawsuits to be heard, but only lawsuits for those that agree with the 25 demands, and legal protection of guards, brown shirts, to get rid of dissenters. Rich businessmen donate millions to the Nazis in order to avoid communism. Hitler ultimately murders the people who helped him rise to power and anyone who now questioned his authority in the Night of Long Knives, where the SA, or the brown shirts, slit people's throats in their sleep. Now, I know you're thinking, but you said Hitler's rise to power was ultimately legal, and murder is definitely not legal. Well, Hitler knew that too. So, he retroactively created the law relating to the National Emergency Defense Measure that made murder technically legal if it was to preserve the German state and if it protected Nazi interests. When Hindenburg dies in 1934, the power vacuum that Hindenburg held off was officially left open to Hitler, who combines the role of the Chancellor and the President under one in Article 48 in the emergency powers. So go back and look at your notes on Mussolini. How does this compare and contrast to the rise to power of Hitler? Was Mussolini's rise to power legal? And how much of Hitler's rise was due to his actual actions versus the failures of others?